Leading up to the release of Thrawn Treason, all I heard people say was, "It's the final book in the Thrawn trilogy," and it really fucked me off. Firstly, it's not a trilogy, it's a series of books that focuses on one character and are loosely connected. Entire seasons of Rebels take place between these books. That's not a trilogy, it's just another chapter in Thrawn's story. It's also not a trilogy because Timothy Zahn himself has said he's got plenty of ideas ready to go for more Thrawn books, he just needs the green light from Disney before he can do them. It's not a trilogy any more than all the X-Wing books are. People need to get it out of their heads that just because the expanded universe started with the Thrawn trilogy, and this is the third book in this series, that this is the new Thrawn trilogy. It's not. I can see why people are doing it with the third book, even if they are wrong, but even before Alliances was released, they were calling that the second book in the Thrawn trilogy, and it just isn't, and it never has been. A trilogy has a beginning, a middle, and an end. This is just the third book in a series, that's all. Having said that, the books do flow nicely together, but that still doesn't mean it's a trilogy, that means it's good writing from Zahn in this series. I loved the first book, I thought Alliances was good but not as good as the first one, and that left me wondering exactly how much I would enjoy this book. I've outlined plans before that I think would be excellent for future Thrawn books if this one was handled right, and I couldn't believe it when Zahn actually did some of the things I said he should do in Treason. The book starts with a prologue and sets up the book, which is absolutely everything I wanted it to be. It's set on a Chiss ship that's just gone into stealth mode, hoping to avoid Imperials, and the Imperials jump. Straight away, this is a good thing for me because unless it's a coincidence, it's the same ship that we saw at the end of Alliances, so rather than having a new story, we have a direct continuation of events from the previous book, but this time told from a different perspective. The other tick for the prologue is when the Chiss Admiral debates what to do next and how to infiltrate the Empire. Someone questions whether they should call a certain someone in, and that someone is none other than Eli Vanto, Thrawn's protege from the first book. It was really exciting to see him mentioned so early because he wasn't in Alliances at all. But we all know the really interesting thing about these books is the Chiss ascendancy and the possible confrontation they will have with the Empire, and I believe the war that will happen in unknown space between them and the Grisks. It was also pretty cool to see how they talked about Eli, with him now being in the exact same position Thrawn was in the first book. The Chiss consider Eli to be an outsider and not very well versed in their ways. They call him by his Chiss name, which is Eli Vant, one big word with an apostrophe after Eli, the same way Thrawn's Chiss name has a few apostrophes in there. But their main issue with him is identical to people's issues with Thrawn. Eli is considered to be a bit socially awkward, unaware of political landscapes, not particularly good at Chiss social cues, although he is still considered to be very smart, something we saw him develop in his time with Thrawn in the first book, as well as on his journey to Chiss space where he read Thrawn's messages to him that dictated his logic. It was nice to see Eli back so early, as well as being considered a useful tool, even if nobody particularly likes him. It's exactly what Thrawn was in the first book. I wanted Eli back, it's something I said I wanted, and top marks for bringing him back so early rather than waiting to reveal him at the end of the book. After the prologue, we see Thrawn summoned to a meeting with Tarkin, Krennic and Grand Admiral Savit, and it's here where Thrawn's story really starts in this book, as he's drawn into a challenge to claim the funding for his TIE Defenders. Krennic's supplies for the Death Star are going missing because his ships keep getting hijacked by creatures called Grallochs, cousins of the Minocs, and if he can stop them in a week, he gets his funding. Thrawn agrees. Krennic sends his best man, Roland, to keep an eye on him and try to misdirect him so he finishes the project, but just longer than a week. That way Krennic keeps all his Death Star funds, but also has the Gralloch problem dealt with. Thrawn quickly works out that the ships aren't being stolen by the Grallochs, rather they're being stolen by pirates, and using trigonometry, Thrawn works out the location where the stolen ships meet to drop off the cargo to another ship, which is then free to carry the Imperial load without arousing any suspicion because it's not in an Imperial vessel anymore. This leads to an encounter with the Grisks, who, for some reason, are on the complete opposite side of the galaxy from the unknown regions. Apparently they were scouting, and Thrawn and his crew win the battle against them, but he's aware that there are more ships out there in this bizarre formation that made absolutely no sense to me. I don't understand why the ships would have been in this particular formation, other than so Zahn could write that Thrawn is aware of the formation and can work out where all the ships are from that. It's a nice idea, but when you have to invent something new that doesn't make sense purely for the protagonist to rise above it, it comes across as manufactured, and I didn't enjoy it particularly. The middle of the book by far is the worst part of the book because it drags on so much. Eli and Thrawn split up, so them teaming up on their reunion didn't work out anywhere near close to how I hoped it would, especially considering when the first time they met, Thrawn was like Lieutenant Vanto and then just walks off and fucking ignores him. So I was hoping they would adventure together in this book, but they split up. With Thrawn mostly sitting in space, tracking particles, and Eli gets captured by pirates. Look, full credit to Zahn, I like the idea of a Star Destroyer being scientific. Sure, there's the name, and it has the guns, but it makes sense that it would have scientific instruments so it can make new discoveries, or detect pockets of gas for mining. It's like the evil, souped up version of the Enterprise, although they already did that in Into Darkness, but you know what I mean. And I applaud Zahn for including this kind of scientific side to Imperial weaponry and vehicles. However, when Thrawn spends the entire second act using those instruments to find invisible particles in space, it just gets so fucking boring and it's not enough to hold my attention. Then there's Eli's side of the second act, captured by pirates. I'm so sick of every time a Star Wars author needs something, they automatically go the pirate route. Blank space in a book? No problem, let's have pirates. It's getting old quick and I hope they stop it. Eli escapes and eventually reunites with Thrawn, so it just seemed like a pointless section when something so much more important could have been included. The only worthwhile thing that happened in Eli's section was that he met up conveniently, let's just call it that, with a member of the Imperial Security Bureau who's important later on to the story, but is only there entirely by coincidence. Having said that about the second act, I did like the third act and the final battle. It's actually a two-pronged battle with the Chiss forces fighting the Grisks and Thrawn challenging the person who was truly responsible for the missing ships at the Death Star, none other than Grand Admiral Savit, the person from the beginning of the book who Tarkin had told to help Thrawn win. I'll start with the battle of the Chiss versus the Grisks. I loved certain aspects of it, then there's one particular bit that I didn't like. Let's talk about gravity wells and invisibility cloaks for a second. In Alliances, it's made crystal clear that a gravity well and an invisibility cloak cannot under any circumstances work in the same space together because they are polar opposites of each other. Is that scientifically correct? Who knows, it's just a fun bit of sci-fi, but that's the law laid down by Zahn himself in this universe, so that's what we have to go with. So why is it then that in this book, Thrawn's ultimate move is to use a gravity well that's cloaked? How is that in any way not completely contradictory to what he wrote in Alliances? And you know what? Usually I blame Hidalgo, but this is straight from Zahn, so I'm blaming him. He should know better. Zahn's a writer that doesn't normally need someone to check his work. I mean, Hidalgo doesn't check anybody's work anyway, we all know that. But I'm surprised this happened and that it came from Zahn, of all people. You could say that the gravity wells weren't cloaked, that they were launched at the Grisk ships, cloaked, then switched to gravity when they were close enough, but I don't accept that because we know that the moment they detect hyperspace travel, they automatically switch to their gravity well mode, and once they did that, the Grisks in their giant warships could have very easily destroyed the handful of them that were there and then jumped to light speed. But this brings me on to the bit that I did like. Anyone who's read the Thrawn trilogy will know this manoeuvre. It was the tactic Thrawn used at Bilbringi to bring all his forces in at once at exactly the right position, guaranteeing a surprise attack with all of his forces rather than just a mere handful of them. This time it's a little bit different, and rather than having a full fleet pulled out of hyperspace at the right place, it's a squad of Thrawn's TIE fighters, but this time the gravity wells were inside the shields of the Grisk ships, so when the defenders travelled in through hyperspace, they were actually pulled out closer to the Grisk ships than the Grisk's own fighters were, leaving the ships open to massive attacks from the defenders. I thought it was smart except for one thing. They used this tactic more than once, and I can't for the life of me understand why the Grisks wouldn't just destroy the gravity well once it activated the first time and had become visible. Surely it would show up on all their radars and doodads. So why didn't they blow it up? They know about this technology, it's their own technology, so that makes no sense to me. This is why I went on about how they were very clearly defined in alliances. It affects this book in a negative way. Had Zahn just written that the defenders came in once and destroyed the ships, it wouldn't have been anywhere near as big of a deal, but he didn't, and that brings the logic of these books down, and considering it's Thrawn, that's a big no-no. With one Grisk ship destroyed and the other damaged, the second one chooses to self-destruct because the Grisks don't allow themselves to be captured. The other part of the finale is Thrawn's battle with Savit, and I absolutely loved this. This was brilliant. Thrawn realises who the leader of the pirates is and boards Savit's Star Destroyer, and only once he's on the bridge is it truly revealed that Savit is the traitor. A Grand Admiral was working against the Empire. I wasn't expecting it, although there's hints of it as Savit heads towards the bridge, but as Thrawn confronts Savit and slowly draws the truth out of him, Savit admits it's because the Death Star is a bad idea. One attack could destroy it, whereas Thrawn's defenders are far too many to be destroyed, and Savit didn't want all the money to be wasted on the Death Star, so he was quietly stealing the massive turbo lasers that we see in the trench run, so he could equip them to his flagship to use against the rebellion. The kicker for this scene though is that Savit won't go down quietly, and Thrawn, having listened to Savit's music, which is a form of art, knew how to force Savit's hand and guide him into preparing to attack the Chimera. But Thrawn trained his people well, and I thought it was extremely clever the way Thrawn fought the battle from on the bridge of the ship he was trying to capture, while Commodore Farrow commands the battle from the bridge of the Chimera, following out Thrawn's orders but also adapting as she sees Savit's manoeuvres. Like chess, all the moves are made beforehand, it's just how the game is played that matters, just like in Sherlock Holmes when he plans a fight before the first punch, and this battle is no different. Studying Savit's music let Thrawn predict exactly what he would do, so with his instructions given to Farrow, he didn't need to be on the Chimera, and just being on the Fire Drake while he defeated Savit was the ultimate bitch slap in my opinion, and I thought it was excellent. Ultimately, the battle ends when the member of the Imperial Security Bureau, Eli, happened to pick up very conveniently in the second act of the book, announces Savit's arrest for pulling a gun on the bridge of a Star Destroyer, which is apparently against Imperial Code. From there, while being held, Savit's other crimes would be investigated. It's also revealed that Commodore Farrow had been held back, and we found this out earlier in the book, and when Thrawn congratulates her for doing a good job, she says to him, "Why did you hold me back?" That's what Roland said. And he said, "I haven't held you back, I've actually recommended you for a better post than the one you were expecting," and I believe he's recommended her to be a Grand Admiral. And now that he's removed Savit for his command, she's actually going to be the leader of that fleet. So hopefully next time we see her, she'll be Grand Admiral Farrow. And that would be pretty cool, because with Thrawn gone, and what's her name? You know, the one from A New Dawn and the Aftermath trilogy, there's like this gap there. So they could have another Grand Admiral, one that was trained by Thrawn in that era of books. I'm just going to talk about Roland for a minute because with the book wrapped up, the only thing left is the call to Tarkin about who was responsible for the attacks and whether Thrawn did complete the bet. Roland is an arsehole, a full-on, to quote Chuck Wendig, prolapsed arsehole. He's assistant director on the Death Star project, and as such, only answers to Krennic and the Emperor, but I suspect mostly Krennic. And he loves answering to Krennic. I'm pretty sure if he could, he'd live inside Krennic, and yes, that is a euphemism. He's so blinded by his love of everything Krennic does, he's practically his clone, and he can't see that Krennic's way isn't always the right way. Every now and then throughout the book, there's these glimpses where he seems to realise this, but then he always goes back to his old ways. He's just a dickhead. In this book, he's the guy you love to hate. I thought he wasn't entirely wrong though, just narrow-minded. Then I listened to the audiobook and I don't know what the fuck happened there. Imagine Mr. Popo from Dragon Ball Z and you've pretty much got the voice down pat. It was narrated by Mark Thompson and he's really good at impressions, especially Thrawn.
The first indicator was the incomplete data you gave me on the Grolix. You did not want us to realize the creatures were drawn to Clouzone 36, which was the lure you used to bring them to your chosen freighters.
The Emperor?
Very wise, Governor Tarkin. Perhaps Director Krennic, you would be kind enough to explain your reading of the situation. For both our benefits.
And Tarkin?
At the same time, there are issues, particularly with regard to the allocation of funds. Are you familiar with Grand Admiral Thrawn's TIE Defender project?
And while they're all fantastic, for some reason his Krennic is Cockney.
I understand you wish to take funding away from my Stardust project.
And while I understand it might sound the same to Americans, to us there's a massive difference between Krennic's accent and Cockney, and for reasons that are beyond my grasp, his Savit is Sean Connery.
You could probably defeat me 1-to-1, but this is 4-to-1, and you're here, not on the Chimera.
But you listen to Mr. Popo from Dragon Ball Z.
Come here, hold on!
And Roland sounds the same to me.
And my third choice?
So why he went Campers Christmas for someone who's the second most important character when it comes to running the construction of the Death Star is beyond me. His portrayal of Roland made me lose any seriousness for the character, and he just seemed completely inept and cartoony, and that's just not how he came across to me from the book at all. But in both the book and the audiobook, Roland is an arse licker. There's no denying that. So at the end of the book, when they communicate with Tarkin about stopping the thefts, Tarkin asks Roland if Thrawn fulfilled his end of the bargain, and Roland says no, he didn't, because he didn't stop the Gralloch problem, he stopped something else. The end result of the problems is the same, missing ships and parts, but technically, since there was no Gralloch problem to fix, Thrawn didn't fix it, and this is why Thrawn didn't get his Defender funding in Rebels. After the transmission ends, Thrawn offers to send Roland either back to the Empire, where he will be watched by Vader, who would sense his hatred of the Emperor and his games and therefore kill him. He could run, where he would be hunted down and killed, or he could join the Chiss and help fight the Grisks, which in turn shows loyalty to the Empire because it would protect the Empire. Reluctantly, he chooses to join Eli Vanto and the Grisks, which I thought was quite ironic, considering he spent the whole book calling Eli Vanto a traitor for doing the exact same thing. Eli says his goodbyes to the crew of the Chimera, rejoins the Chiss, and Admiral Aralani tells Eli that the mundane work he was doing at the beginning of the book was extremely important. It was patterns relating to the Skywalkers, not the family, but the group of Force-sensitive Chiss girls that use the Force to navigate hyperspace, which is the only way Chiss use hyperspace. They don't have nav computers or anything. Aralani is hoping Eli can work out a pattern between them that may be the key to finding more of them or unlocking their full potential, or both, and that's pretty much it for the book. Overall, I liked it. I think there were a few missteps, like the gravity generators or Roland in the audiobook, or the entire second act of the book, which was slow as hell, but overall it was good. What I want to see now is Thrawn actually dealing with the Grisks overall, not just one group at a time like he has been so far. The thing I want to see most is him drive the Grisks away, so that if we have Thrawn books set after the finale of Rebels, we can see him, Ezra, Eli, Roland and the rest of the Chiss have an all-out war with them in the unknown regions, or I'd like to see him do it now. But considering this book is set after the mid-season finale of season 4 of Rebels, that's established in the book, they mention about having Hera in captivity, and we know what happens about 6 episodes later, there really isn't time. So hopefully it's the first one where we see it in the future books set after Rebels, because there's literally no room to squeeze any more in at this point in the timeline. Dave Filoni's done the same thing he did with Ahsoka. There's no proof of Thrawn's death. There's no proof of his life, it's just unknown at the moment. So people who say Thrawn is dead are wrong. People who say Thrawn is alive are wrong. His status is unknown, and I kind of like that because it means he can be brought back, and I don't think bringing him back would be a retcon any more than if somebody jumped to hyperspace in one episode of Rebels and then came out of hyperspace in the next episode of Rebels is a retcon. The thing is, Ezra used those whale things to go to hyperspace, but they're not going to go to hyperspace if it's going to kill themselves. So wherever they ended up, I see no reason why Thrawn and Ezra shouldn't be alive, and I'm hoping that's going to be in the unknown regions. I also want Zahn to really do something with the Grisks, because the obvious comparison for them in the expanded universe is the Yuuzhan Vong, but the Vong were a real vicious threat. They were smart and infiltrated places, but they were also physically challenging. You know, they damaged themselves to the point that the Force didn't even recognise them anymore. The Grisks just keep popping up in small numbers and it's getting old really quickly. I want to see Zahn do something with them that really showcases why we the reader should consider them to be one of the best Star Wars enemies of all time, because so far they're just unknown and a bit boring and come across as backwards, lame and inept. They're like the Deliverance version of Star Wars baddies. So yeah, Thrawn Treason was enjoyable if you can accept a few missteps here and there, and while Eli's reunion with Thrawn felt exactly as deflating as when Rey meets Luke in The Last Jedi, it was nice to see them working together again. I do hope we get more Thrawn books free of being constrained by both the Rebels show and the history of the galaxy, because let's face it, if any future stories are set in the unknown regions, Zahn would be completely free to play around with all the characters in an all-out war, because if any of them live or die, it doesn't affect the main story in any way, shape or form. He's got the opportunity here for like a Tales of the Jedi kind of scenario where it's so detached from the main timeline, he can do whatever he wants, and I'd like to see him do that. I'd like to see him be able to do that. Speaking of characters, Roland being sent to the Chiss at the end of this book felt very much to me like when we got that series of Iron Fist right before the Defenders. We'd had like 2 Daredevils, 2 Jessica Jones and 1 Luke Cage, I think, and then we were just waiting on Iron Fist so that we could watch the Defenders. That's what we were really waiting for. We knew we were waiting for one more to drop before the big guns came out, basically. Roland felt like that after reading the book, and since he's the assistant director on the Death Star project, and he's gone to the unknown regions, it wouldn't surprise me at all if there really is a full-on war between the Chiss, Grisks and the First Order, or, if it's not the First Order yet, the remains of the Empire, and somehow, whether by choice, or by torture, or by Kylo Ren or Snoke, the secrets of the Death Star technology are taken from Roland and used to build Starkiller Base. Hopefully Disney and Hidalgo will allow Zahn to play with this. I would well be up for a series showcasing this war. I just really hope he gets to do it. As for Thrawn Treason, it was good. I thought it had better pacing than Alliances and it was enjoyable for what it was, but we all knew Thrawn wouldn't betray the Empire anyway since it's set before the Rebels finale, so they never really tricked anyone into thinking that anyway.